to me, the interesting bit here is to think about them stepping into this complexity that all of these AI labs will have now, which is, where is it that I want to be a platform that people build on?
Yes.
And I want them to be able to trust that they can build on me, and I'm not going to go and try and compete with them directly after and start limiting their access, et cetera. And where is it that they actually want to capitalize on the solutions? And I think in the software engineering space, more and more appetite from these labs to be that solution. Anthropic specifically is an interesting spot they have a lot of fans in the AI dev space that are building on top of it. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you're them, you want to be very sensitive.
You're listening to the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tesla.
Hello and welcome to another monthly roundup of the AI Native Dev. My name's Simon. Joining me once again, Guy Pachani.
Hey Simon, it's fun to do another.
Absolutely. And this time around, we're going to take a look at what's been happening in the wonderful month of February. And we had some amazing news. We had some wonderful sessions as normally on the podcast. Guy, another month goes by. Another model or more models.
Yeah, it's like 17 of them, or well, maybe a little bit less. Yeah, but definitely was a big news day or news month with both sort of GPT-4.5 and Sonnet 3.7, and actually like earlier in the month, Grok 3 in the process. Yeah, like a lot of numbers and a lot of funky names.
It is interesting, and we'll go through those. I think the two that people are most drawn to here, GPT-4.5 and Sonnet 3.7. We'll go through that.
That sounds like you're biased a little bit. Affected by the liberal media.
My trading data has been slightly poisoned, so yeah, I'm leaning towards them too.
As long as you don't say that anything negative about Elon is okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and talk. Actually, no. First of all, before we deep dive into the models, do you feel like that there seems to be like this snowball effect where very often one model vendor releases an update and all of a sudden we see another one and another one. And it's weird. It's like one of those car races where everyone's nudging in front every 5 minutes. Do you feel like there is huge outside pressure from businesses, investors, marketing teams for companies to release because others are equally releasing that month or week?
Yeah.
Very convenient.
Without a doubt, there is like massive pressure of it. Part of it is just dominating the news cycle. So it's just like this sort of whole world is really hitting mainstream media and everybody talks about it. And so I think you don't want to let any other player, if you're one of these big players, dominate the news for any window of time. So you want to pierce in and break it out. And I think that's true for all of them. But I also think that there is like just the pace of experimentations and trials and all that is very high. And so there is also an element of literally amidst users, when you kind of get people that are excited to try a new thing, if you let that sort of sit for longer, those users might get a little bit set in their ways.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. There's an open question about how much would people actually end up sticking to one model over time. Like right now, they feel very interchangeable. You can switch from whatever your Claude chat to your OpenAI chat, and we'll talk about that a bit more. But I guess some view, especially like the big investors, like in the latest Anthropic round that also happened just now, they believe that there are some tracks that are being set, there are some patterns, and that maybe similar to what happened in the cloud, which is the initial impression is like, fine, I can run it on whatever EC2 or whatever other sort of cloud's equivalent. But in practice over time, as the fine details have expanded, moving clouds is actually not at all easy. That maybe this will happen as well in ElevenLabs. I don't think we're seeing it now. So for now, I think it's more like news cycle domination and getting users.
Yeah, very interesting. Let's dig down into a couple of them. We'll start with GPT-4.5, which I think was released first. Was that right? It was a long time ago.
Yeah, no, but I think Sonnet 3.7 actually came out first.
So the reaction was 4.5. Yeah. Interesting. So we'll start with the most recent going backward. Let's put it that way. So GPT-4.5.
So the recency bias here. Like I'm just sort of detecting a lot of bias, Simon, a lot of bias.
One of the interesting things, and this came out in a lot of the OpenAI marketing, was this mention of it having higher EQ than previous models, the 4.5 release. And some of the examples there, someone prompting saying, I'm going through a tough time after failing a test. And you look at 4.0, which tries to solve the problem, but 4.5 is actually far more compassionate and trying to understand what the user really actually wants. Do they just want to chat about it? They want to know someone's there. And it's a far more, dare I say, Claude-like personable response. That's an interesting one. And I feel like people, I don't know, I'm going to give maybe my personal bias now, but people I find connect with Claude because it is more human than some of the other GPTs. This is a very interesting move to have this more personal.
I think it's an interesting choice. There's a little bit of an acknowledgement that it's not just about your sort of benchmark numbers and how you're handling that, but also about just sentiment for it. And so I think that is interesting. Like, it's been identified as a strength of Claude, and OpenAI is trying to counter that on it. I think there's also an element of just styles that people prefer, right? There's the whole kind of, what is it? Women are from Venus, men are from Mars. Maybe 4.0 is for Mars and 4.5 is from Venus. But yeah, and it is quite noticeable. There's been some interesting and I think valid pushback that you might not really want a model that is of one style and a model that is of another, but rather to be able to express a little bit more of what type of conversation do you want at the moment. And I think actually in Claude that you see in the drop downs, what style do you prefer? Do you want a more formal conversation? Do you want more of a personal? And defaults to personal. But it's interesting. It's just, I think especially interesting that there isn't, a benchmark that you can win on this EQ. So it'll basically be judged by the population. I don't think, like, maybe people are trying, but I don't think you can really measure how human, almost like counterintuitive, right? Like, how human are you in your responses?
So, it's interesting, like you say, I'm really trying to stop myself saying Grok is from Uranus, but I feel like I can't. I feel like I can't just leave that sitting there. So I'll finish with that. But I think some of the OpenAI tests that they've done themselves, very interesting as well. They talk about essentially whether humans prefer the responses from 4.5 versus 4.0. And big caveat, this is the OpenAI tests. Everyday queries, 57% of people prefer the 4.5 versus 4.0, 63% of professional queries, and 56% of creative intelligence. So there is data that kind of from OpenAI that says people do lean towards those. Although I know there are some others. I think you were mentioning you saw something on Twitter.
There was surveys that counter that a little bit. I think in general, I'd say we really have to, this is such a massive sort of domain of actions and preferences and so much sort of room for subjective analysis that I think it's a little bit hard to really take any data that comes out of these labs. Indeed, Grok 3 published a bunch of numbers that were cast in doubt. Now these ones from OpenAI. I don't think it's even like a wrongdoing by them. Like, clearly they will take or Rosie, you wouldn't publish the stats that you have that are negative about you. I think Karpathy put out a survey on Twitter where he did some blind testing, put some A and B responses that alternated between 4 and 4.5 responses, expecting everybody to then prefer the 4.5 responses. And actually, the survey ended up favoring 4.0. And I think that's a little bit underwhelming. I think it's important to put this a little bit in context of this sort of 4.5 release, right? So 4.5 is the first kind of increment of the number since GPT-4 got released 2 years ago, or like March of 23. And so I think the expectation that people kind of have for this model, the expectations they have are really quite substantial, right? It's estimated to have been sort of 10 times more expensive to train. It is between 15 and 30 times more expensive in terms of tokens, depending on you look at input and output. And so I think you come into it and you expect something that would blow you away. So I would say that even the OpenAI stats that sort of say people slightly favor 4.5 don't quite match the expectations. People think more like we're expecting maybe something that's more like 3 to 4, like GPT-3 to GPT-4. They only incremented half a number. Maybe there's a statement in that. So unlike the reasoning models that feel like they really leveled up what the LLMs can do, 4.5 was a little underwhelming.
Unless I'm reading those numbers right, it's only a slight leaning in sentiment towards the 4.5, even with the OpenAI numbers.
And in the blind testing, it was even on the other side of it. Karpathy was wondering about whether the connoisseurs, like the people, I forget, he had a slightly more humble kind of a term for it, for people with fine taste for LLM's output of it, might prefer the 4.5 as he does. So maybe there's elements of that. But again, I find it's not about whether people prefer 4.5. Let's say 4.5 would consistently get slightly better than average preference. I guess coming in, you just sort of say, hey, they're going to release this thing. It's going to be this sort of big price differential and all of that. I would expect it to be kind of a landslide, right? Like to win by a mile. And it's not doing that.
And OpenAI, interestingly, do also share some accuracy figures where they show on their simple QA accuracy tests an improvement. It's a reasonable improvement. You're looking at, I don't know, what's this, 10, 20% on top of 4.0 and 0.1. A significant, maybe, what's that? The 45% increase over 0.3 mini. Hallucinations are down as well across the other three models, 4.0, 0.1 and 0.3 mini. So they are showing some kind of stats that I would more believe in the sense of if you look at them, it's actually tests that are run across multiple.
Right, because there's no standard.
Sentiment.
And people would replicate those, so it doesn't really serve them to publish anything that would therefore thereafter be debunked.
Yeah. Now, rumor has it, Guy, Tesla building a product as well. It's not a model, of course. So just to clarify, after talking about models, it's not a model, but we use other models in our code generation and throughout the development workflow. So we've built evals of our own, and we've tested the various new models that have come out. As every eval team, I'm sure, on Red Alert on a week of multiple models coming out.
Everybody's very curious. Like it's work, but I think people are excited.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of when a security vulnerability comes out and everyone's all hands on deck. Yeah. It reminds me of that when a new model comes out. All eval teams and development teams are hard at work trying to test, and I'm sure
see what it can do.
Product teams are like.
I think there's a little bit more excitement when you just get that kind of vulnerability of it. But, so we tested 4.5. For us, the results were actually not exciting at all. So on the code gen side, and actually it's not just code gen because we talk about creating specifications and understanding them and such, but a lot of it is around systems understanding. It actually did worse than 4.0 and not by a small amount. Now, I want to caveat that a little bit that I do think every model there's a level of just like, hey, throw the previous model's prompts and processes at it and see how it fares. And then there's like levels of optimization. And we have seen cases in which when you optimize, you actually surpass what you can do with what you've optimized for before. Yeah. But the gap is not small. So the numbers are not accurate enough to really share precise numbers here. We're still evaluating them, but it really is like substantially below 4.0. Yeah. And I think it comes down a little bit also like this comment on hallucinations. What we've seen over the past sort of 6 months is that even within the same model, within 4.0 releases of it, they're not always progressing on a straight line. And so some of them might become more creative. Some of them might become more, analytical. And so we've even seen regressions within the same model over time in terms of their specific code gen. And working with OpenAI, it's legit, right? It is different capabilities and different are highlighted in different versions of the model. Yeah. I think what's a little bit odd here is that we're trying to do something that's more analytical, and in that it did not fare as well. And that should be, if they're highlighting the reduced hallucinations and things like that, those it should be better over there. But it does maybe align with their statement on the emphasis on EQ and human interactions, which might not serve for our purposes, might not be as important. Yeah. And so I think what we're learning, so I would say high level, jury's still out. We need to try it out. It's first models. Maybe there will be big improvements on it. It'll be interesting to see the reasoning models that are built on top of 4.5 versus on top of 4.0. So I think there's a lot to still see. But arrival hasn't blown us away. Like, it has actually been a bit of a setback. And I think it's hard right now to say, I will pay like an order of magnitude more for switching to it. And that's our experience, but also generally, like I've really have yet to see someone really swear by it. So we'll see. Not hasn't arrived with a big wave of success.
Yeah. And actually, let's switch across now to Sonnet 3.5. You talked a little bit about reasoning. That's right. I keep doing that. It's been 3.5 for so long. It's been 3.5 for so long. I automatically default to that. Sonnet 3.7. You mentioned reasoning. One of the big things that dropped in Sonnet 3.7, of course, was dynamic reasoning. It's the first hybrid reasoning model on the market, as they state, as a combined model. It does, step-by-step style thinking, similar to DeepSeek, right? The way DeepSeek very verbosely stated what it was doing. What are your thoughts on, first of all, the dynamic reasoning aspect? And secondly, I guess, comparisons to other models, to the OpenAI models?
I think there's a few things to note for it. So first of all, exciting to see the reasoning models from Anthropic. I think it's the first reasoning model, or sort of thinking model. And I think that has definitely pioneered by OpenAI, but is now being accepted as the right model. Maybe I'd sort of say three things. One is, indeed, they've chosen to be open with its thinking, like DeepSeek. It doesn't ramble on and on as much as R1. Like DeepSeek, it's chatty.
You were worried about your tokens when you saw it chatting back.
It really takes a while to make up its mind, which is, by the way, fascinating, especially when you see how it thinks about what it should answer to appease the human.
There's a level of trust in that, though. When you see that, you believe it's doing the right thing, and you feel what...
And it's charming for a moment and then just gets in the way. And you can collapse it. I think their new versions actually now are allow you to hide that a bit more. So it seems like Anthropic have actually toned that down a bit more, but it is more open than OpenAI. And I think maybe to an extent, OpenAI's decision to hide the reasoning logic didn't work maybe as much as they might have planned, in the sense of delaying others from creating reasoning models.
Yes.
Just based on the pace of others releasing them.
Yes.
But definitely it's a different choice that's more transparent. And you're right, a bit more sort of trust building. And just interesting, like we do see that when we look at the reasoning logic, for instance, it guides us as to where is it that we might have gotten a prompt correct or not.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. That's maybe a bit more on the sort of aesthetics or sort of some choices of it. I think the second aspect of it is indeed this dynamic reasoning. That's actually novel. It's been mentioned by OpenAI. It's been mentioned by Google before. So I don't think it's a new concept, but I think it's the first one that actually provides it. I'm not entirely sure about the Gemini one. And what it means is you can have the model tell the model how hard to think. Mm-hmm. And that's a difference between OpenAI's world, in which you choose whether to go to a non-thinking or a fast-thinking model, mm-hmm. like 4.0 or 4.5, or do you go to these thinking models, 1 and 03, 03 mini, and you have them produce and think deeply here. Mm-hmm. They're saying like, hey, we don't want you to switch models. It is the same model. And you just want to say how many cycles, how many kind of iterations or digestion you have around it. I don't exactly know the sort of the math behind the scenes, but I think it makes more sense from a user perspective, right? I don't want to choose, does this require thought or not? Mm-hmm. I don't want the binary level of think a little bit or think a ton and just max and min. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really interesting, and I think people will play with it. I do think that the hope is that it would figure it out itself. If I ask you how much 3.3, 3 plus 3 is, then, or what's the latest version of Sonnet on it?
I'll give you an answer, yes. Don't put me on the spot, I'll give you an answer.
I might expect you to not think very hard about this, right? Versus I'd give you a multiplications of some sort of 7-digit numbers. I might expect you to pen and paper and so start writing. Mm-hmm. And so I think there might be another layer coming that decides how much to think.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty interesting. Like I guess I relate to that from a product sensibility perspective. I don't have a strong opinion around its implications on the model, right? You can imagine how it really should be a very different model, one that is just like snappy and gives you the result versus one that is a deep thinker.
And I think talking about it from the product point of view, one of the first I saw react to it was Bolt.new. And mm-hmm. of course, I'm a massive fan of Bolt, I must admit. I've used Bolt.new numerous times now in creating like fun prototypes as a Java backend developer. Yes, hands up. I'm happy and proud to admit it. I'm useless at front end development. So Bolt, that will actually do that for me. And I'm not a good design person either. I don't know why you hired me, guy. But I'm not a good design person. Not a good.
I was like, you're just sort of opening up all these other paths on it. But I think you're doing a good job.
So from my point of view, Bolt just does. It fills in the gap. We talk about it filling in the gaps. It fills in my gaps in terms of the areas that I don't necessarily find natural to build. But one of the interesting things is they introduced dynamic reasoning as a toggle, it's a beta for them. They introduced that into their product, and it allows them, based on the request that a user sends, does it need to think deeply or not? And to your point, if I'm changing a color of something, or if I'm doing something where it just needs to effectively do something similar that I could do in the code just as a copy replace or something, but I don't want to have to dig in the code, it can just do that very quickly. But if I'm asking it for a major architectural reformatting or architectural decision, yes, it needs to think more deeply. And so it's really interesting to add that in and for it to be able to say, yes, I
think that makes a lot of sense. And it's, I think, a part of the Claude bet is that people want to be able to control which actions require that. Which, again, OpenAI also makes possible by basically making a call to one model and the other. I think what's interesting to sort of see is how people relate to the how much do you want to think. It's easy to say, here you don't need to think, like here just give me a quick answer, and here think deeply before you answer. When is it that I would want you to say think 40% hard, right? Or think 60% hard. Mm-hmm. And so I think it depends on what the sort of the reality and the output is. Mm-hmm. But that's, no pun intended, but a little bit harder to reason about. And say, what are the cases in which you want to think hard, but not hardest about? And where is it that you're willing to take a latency hit, but not complete latency hit? Yeah. You do see a little bit more in Claude, despite all that sensibilities, you do see that, at least at the API level, they have maybe a bit more of an enterprise use case bias. And so there's a lot more flexibility with how they've approached MCP versus the more sort of simplified tool use that OpenAI touts. So there's, again, maybe a little bit of that sort of different flavors, different tracks that different models are choosing.
Yeah.
I do think there's a third bit that's interesting around the Anthropic and the reasoning release, which is, first of all, there is a difference. I want to note that there is a difference between what they do in the API and the more simplicity that they have in the user product. So when you use Claude, you do just have a binary, so more similar to O3 and O1. So I think the third thing to say about Anthropic is there a sort of recent choice also to launch Claude Code. And I think in Code is once again a little bit of that sort of flexibility, sensibilities. Unlike maybe some of the others, they have chosen to release more CLI-esque type tool for code generation. And so I find that to be interesting, kind of maybe the other bit about the less discussed aspect of sort of the Claude release with 3.7. I'm sure it builds on the capabilities within, but I think you're seeing maybe two things in action here. One is, of course, they're sort of leaning into an application type capability. And we've seen that with the chat product of it, but I think it's the first we're seeing from Anthropic to try and offer something that's a bit more sort of a complete use case.
Yes.
And the other is maybe just, I don't know if you're seeing it, but a thought that comes up is how do they relate that to people that are building on top of them, like Cursor, like Bolt.new. And to me, the interesting bit here is to think about them stepping into this complexity that all of these AI labs will have now, which is, where is it that I want to be a platform that people build on?
Yes.
And I want them to be able to trust that they can build on me, and I'm not going to go and try and compete with them directly after and start limiting their access, et cetera. And where is it that they actually want to capitalize on the solutions? And I think in the software engineering space, more and more appetite from these labs to be that solution. Anthropic specifically is an interesting spot on, they have a lot of fans in the AI dev space that are building on top of it. And so I think if you're them, you want to be very sensitive to what are the statements you're making around when should you use Anthropic solutions directly.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on there with the CLI ultimately being an extensibility point for others to build upon. And yeah, it's because if you think about what they have done in the past, where you are able to Claude artifacts and things like that, where you're able to actually build a little React app and you can stand the front end up, and that's the closest we've got to them building something specifically for developer interactions to build with. Claude Code is that bigger step where it's a separate release, and I think it's in beta only right now. But yeah, it's calling out for people to build on top of it, because I don't think someone going in, a developer going in, wants to use a CLI. I think Ada was in the early days. I say early days like it was like 30 years
and I
ago.
think it's still around Ada, but definitely was innovating at the time.
And no one's really followed that part. So I think Claude is looking at this not as a full UI for a developer to use, but more for builders and tinkerers to
it's a good theory, but I think it's a tricky balance. And I've actually, just alluding to a great episode we had this month with a guest, which is I did actually discuss this very topic with Matti from ElevenLabs.
Yeah, so let's jump over to the podcast. There are a few episodes that we had this month. Do you remember when we were at State of OpenCon? Way back when, I think it was 1990 something, I can't remember. It feels like a long time ago.
Like a few weeks ago.
It feels like a long time ago, yeah. Early February, we did an Ask Me Anything live from the State of OpenCon. Wonderful open source conference, and had some great questions, great discussions with a full panel. Do you know what, Guy? I think it feels so long ago and so much has happened. I think we've covered that. We actually had a session just before with the January monthly where we talked about it in the news as well. I think we've covered enough. I don't think we need to talk too much
to do that. We'll talk about it again when Hugging Face eventually launches its whatever sort of US core. A good panel worth doing if you still have questions about DeepSeek. I think we covered quite a lot of topics, the legal side of it, just like many aspects of DeepSeek.
Actually, I lied, Guy. I'm going to ask one question about it.
No.
I'm going to go, just because we said that. Do you think they will be able to either build, or we talk about how DeepSeek distilled from other models, with things like dynamic reasoning? Can you distill dynamic reasoning from a model, or do you feel like you actually have to have some almost like dynamic reasoning plug-in kind of things? Yeah. It's a tricky one, right?
I think they're all, I don't know if distillable is a word, but I think basically the recent history has shown that it's all mimicable on it. Fundamentally, as I understand it, if you were to simplify, you would say fundamentally what you need is you need data. So you need the ability to say, hey, if I pass this input, these sets of inputs tokens, or whatever kind of they may hold, I expect this type of response, or I can evaluate this response. And so as long as you are able to extract that out of others to be able to create the synthetic data, then you're able to train your system. I'm sure there's also algorithmic aspects of how do you interpret that and all that. There's more complexity to it. But at the core of it, if you have access to the model and you can see how it responds, you can generate more and more data that helps you mimic that behavior. And so I do think dynamic reasoning is a setting, like if it becomes useful, and if there are, I don't know, maybe the world does it like temperature, right? But it's still a bit of a voodoo parameter. People find value in it. But do you really know the difference between 0.6 and 0.5? I don't know. Probably not that much. So maybe there's some 3 or 4 like voodoo dynamic reasoning kind of levels that people get used to, then people will probably distill that and copy it over. So I do think actually, if anything, both 4.5 and 3.7 both demonstrate the continued kind of a parade indeed of just everybody moving together. I have not seen it, like, what have we just discussed, right? In 4.5, the conversation is about OpenAI mimicking Claude with its sort of EQ and sensibilities, and in Claude and Anthropic's models, we talk about them basically mimicking things that OpenAI has done around reasoning and around maybe a little bit of like the equivalent to their canvas with the code creation. And so there are subtle differences around how they build it, but fundamentally, I think they're all copying one another. And again, Grok has done that. And I think there are bigger changes, like you see Grok and DeepSeek, here we are talking about this again, which are polar opposites in terms of how you train and the underlying models. And so you have DeepSeek working on whatever low level and not utilize, like squeezing the most out of old hardware, versus Grok, like just XAI, they're throwing tons of money to be able to get the latest NVIDIAs. And so somehow they both end up producing things that are comparable. Similarly, I think Anthropic has made a big bet on using Amazon's GPUs. And so there's sort of implementation choices. I've yet to really see something that feels like a sustainable difference between them.
Yeah. So let's jump into the next two. But first, I want to do a quick shout out for people who are interested in the kind of like the model comparisons. I recorded an amazing session with Macy Baker, who talked about prompt engineering on a previous podcast. She's a community engineer at Tessel. It was so much fun talking about how she created a couple of games, one as the werewolves game, one as a split steel kind of game, and we paired models against each other. And it was hilarious. If you want to talk about EQ, just wait till you hear what happens with Llama and also with DeepSeek. It's also some other news from the AI native dev, which is that, do you remember the conference that we ran last year in November? Indeed. AI native dev con. It was amazing. We actually decided a year is too long to wait for another one. Things move so fast. We have a 2025 spring edition of the AI native
dev. Not to be confused with the Java spring of it.
Absolutely.
As much as Simon wanted it.
Believe it or not, it's going to be better and bigger. So for people who are interested in how you can use AI dev tools today, the future of AI native dev in tooling and practices and programs, and also a new track that we've got, which is AI tools in action. So people actually using some of the best tools around today so that you can actually get practical hands-on experience. So the CFP.
It would be a great event, and the CFP is secretly open.
It's open. We'll share the links in the show notes. Head over to Tessel.io and you'll be able to find the links from next week. So you can register to the event. You can submit your papers as well. We'd love to see you there again.
Yeah, and we're really looking forward to the event. I think the whole purpose of the AI native dev platform here, right, the community, is have people share their learnings, and I think the conference is like a great way to get top thinkers around this. You know, whether you're a tool builder, you're a user of those tools, whether you are an AI philosopher and you have some worthy things to share around how you think it would affect software development. I think creating a stage for that so people can share their learnings is really the purpose of what we're doing over here. So would really looking forward to it, and would love to have you all both attend and submit your thoughts to present.
Absolutely. And talking about a multitude of tools, I had a very practical session. We'll talk about two sessions then, one with Farhath, who I spoke with, and then Matty, the co-founder of ElevenLabs that you spoke with. So Farhath Razak I've known him from the community for a little while now, super smart guy, also really on the pulse with all the AI dev tools around. And there's a number of takeaways actually from that session, but one of the biggest takeaways that I had was the fact that he was actually, as a user of AI dev tools, he doesn't just stick with one. He uses the right tool at the right time, depending on what he's trying to get out of it. And in multiple cases, he actually uses multiple tools. And it's very interesting how I think there's probably a number of them that he uses in freemium, a number of them that he pays for. But that's critical, right?
Yeah.
We're not just using a single tool. We're actually creating a tool belt for ourselves where we use the right tool at the right time. Yeah. This is going to get into a little bit of buzzword bingo now as I go through some of these tools too.
Yeah, no, but I think I love the session. I think very practical.
Yeah.
You get into specifics, but I would say it's a worth listen if you want to see a picture of, it's an individual, it's one person. It might not be precisely right for you, but it is a more complete picture of this is how I use these tools across many aspects of my software development work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll mention a couple, but then we'll jump on.
Yeah.
I think some of the interesting ones, research and ideation, using Perplexity to understand what tech stacks, what are the best libraries, what APIs are there for various projects, using Claude for prototyping, Claude rules to adjust to his style, for development, Cursor, Klein, Windsurf, RuCode, which gives them the opportunity to provide that agentic workflow for web search, essentially. There's a number. There really is. Yeah. Swim was another one that he was quite interested in playing with. Eraser from a DevOps point of view and a deployment point of view. There was a ton.
Yeah.
If you're interested in understanding what each of these tools, how they can be used and where others use them, that's a must listen.
I think really good to listen to it. And probably the thing that struck me the most is the cases in which he's actually using different tools for the same job. And so he uses both Windsurf and Cursor. So that's... If you ask people a year ago, 2 years ago, to say, hey, which ID do you use? There would be a singular answer, right? It's probably going to be VS Code at the time, and there would be one. How many people were using multiple IDs? Tiny number. And I think in AI, we're seeing more. My bet is that it's still because this is all experimentation phase, and they all kind of one-up each other in some specific domain for a brief period of time. Yeah. And I think in a couple of years' time or some period of time, people will get back to, I have my tool. It's 90% good at all of these things, and it's not worthwhile for me, like not worthy to switch to another to use it. Also, I think they're all benefiting from being, like, at least the IDs from being VS Code forks, and so they have some familiarity. Yeah. But it is interesting to see the kind of open-mindedness of people to them. So.
Yeah. No, I loved your session with Matty.
Yeah.
What were your highlights?
So a really fun conversation with Matty from ElevenLabs. In case you're not familiar, ElevenLabs is the leader in AI audio today. So they're now a $3 billion company. They've got millions of users on it. There's sort of the de facto standard today of if you want to do text to speech, text to audio, and then you use their product. And so it was really interesting to hear the conversation. Felt privileged a little bit, both because I know Matty from the London scene on it, but also he doesn't actually do that many sort of podcasts and such. So it was great to get a chance to talk about his journey. It's a little bit less devish, a bit more about AI entrepreneurship and building on top of it. But I think like a lot of the conversation was fun, and I highly recommend listening to it. I'd highlight 3 takeaways. One is we talked about it always felt like this sort of textbook story for how to do an AI startup from a focus perspective. They started with this big vision of dubbing, which requires a lot of moving parts from like you're listening to someone speak in one language and then you need to understand and capture that and understand the voices and who said what when and then translate it. And it's just a lot of moving parts. We kind of outlined those. And then they honed in on text to speech as a specific use case that is valuable in its own right, and figured out sort of good tech innovations to break through there, and really honed in on that and voice cloning as the 2 kind of core capabilities, and really succeeded with them. And now they're expanding back into the broader sort of dubbing vision. And they actually just launched, we recorded it a couple of days, or a little bit before they launched their speech to text model that gets a bunch of those things right, like the ability to know who said what at what points and get precise timestamps and things like that.
And that's called Scribe, right?
And that's called Scribe, and it's a really cool tool. Like, I tried it out. It's easier to find use cases off the fly for text to speech than it is to speech to text. Yeah. But I think I'm keen to have it in meetings when there's like multi-person meetings on it. Yeah. So if you're today in a Zoom and everybody's with their own computer, it's easy to know who said what when. But when you're in a room and multiple people are talking, so I'm keen to try it out for that.
And fun fact, the room that we are recording in is called Champagne. and Champagne is an artist, I believe.
Yeah,
that's
tessellation artist.
Tessellation artist, and all of our meeting rooms are called, are named after those who are artists in and around tessellation. And whenever we're in a meeting room like this and we're on a Zoom, I look at the transcript sometimes, and it's basically a conversation between me and Champagne. And I never realized my life would get to that at some stage where I'm just sat talking to Champagne. But it happens now.
Yeah, every now and then, sometimes on the work. So I think that was really fun to hear the entrepreneurial story of it.
Right.
And I think if you're building an AI company, you're just really interesting about entrepreneurship. I think it was like a good sort of a textbook again example of something you would use. I think the second thing that really stayed with me is the approach to developers, and indeed tackling this problem we talked about with the AI labs around product versus platform. And so ElevenLabs has always been both a product and kind of an API for developers. And so you could go to their UI, plop in some text, pick a voice, and produce audio without being a developer, without being any creator. And I think half their users basically use the product that way. And then you can use their APIs to be able to integrate text-to-speech into your application. And over time, both audiences grew, which is interesting. And they've also, in the API, have grown to provide more sort of big building blocks, conversational agents. And I found that to be really interesting, of like building out, understanding the use cases. Again, some of it is just textbook kind of company building, but understanding from the use cases people were using their APIs for, what are more complete programmable use cases they want to make available, and then make those easy. And so we had a really good conversation about that. And mostly what I was trying to push him a bit on is, if you're a developer and you're building on ElevenLabs, how do you know to anticipate when would ElevenLabs potentially release a product and compete with you? And I think that is a question on a lot of sort of AI startups' minds, and because they're building on these AI labs, and these AI labs are a bit declaratively going into the application layer in certain fronts. Right. And I liked his answer, which really anchored on transparency. He said, here's our plan, here's our vision, which he explained more broadly. It talks a little bit about call centers. It talks about the dubbing in this world. And it says, if you're in that world, if you're using ElevenLabs to create a dubbing solution on it, you should anticipate that we will compete with you and we'll have a product. But this declaration is also a bit stating what they're not planning to do. So I liked the approach, but also, again, I found that conversation to be really interesting. That's the second bucket there.
And from I don't know if I'm preempting your third bucket now or not, but from an organization build point of view, there are a couple of interesting things he mentioned. One was...
Can I interrupt you over there?
Absolutely.
If we had a sort of a scribe here, it would interrupt. We had a very interruptive conversation generally.
Sorry, let me cut you off there, Guy.
The organization conversation was...
Now you're naturally interested. The organization, because a lot of people think, okay, for this, we need huge amounts of money, and we build a big, solid, very strong team to build this out. And the way we build faster is grow the team. But that's not so much the case in ElevenLabs, right?
So I think in general, I think the math in these sort of big AI labs is a little bit different, because they spend buckets of money on GPUs and all that sort of training exercise. But the organization piece it was indeed the sort of my third bullet of it on ElevenLabs. The team is still under 150 people. It is generally quite small and nimble for a company that is, I think, north of 100 million ARR, and again, millions of users, and valued at $3 billion on it. So that's already quite impressive. But I tried to probe a little bit Matti's views on long-term research versus incremental research, and asked him, how do you think about now investing in breakthrough research, finding out that they have been actually building a new model versus things that are just a little bit better? And that was a good conversation, I think, worth hearing. But then he kept referring to the teams being small. And someone was like asking him, how small? And it turns out the team that is building these sort of big models that break through next model is a team of 5 people. And that's tiny when you think about the impact that each of these individuals has. And even the other team, I think it's some 5 to 10 people, or sort of 7, 8 people, I think, in the follow-on conversations. Those people work on incremental. That's also still a very tiny team serving millions of users that are using these models. And so I found that to be, one, interesting, two, quite almost like inspiring, right? To sort of think about the breadth of impact that an individual could have, right, within those companies, and impressive as they build it. And yeah, there was another conversation on it on how do you then run that organization, and a choice that they've made around eliminating titles across the organization, which I also found to be, I don't know, definitely daring. So they've taken away all titles. They didn't really, as you probe in, they do have, you are the team lead, but it's a bit like what you might tell a good parenting philosophy is when you talk to your kids, don't tell them that they are stupid. Tell them they've done something stupid, right? Or don't tell them they are smart. Tell them they've done something smart. So they get to develop a little bit their identity, but they judge their actions by their actions, not just embed all of that to I will always do that. Yeah. And so it's a little bit like that. They said, you are managing this team versus you are the manager of this team. So they have functional kind of semi-titles, but they've chosen like to really embrace that sort of company-wide, to not have seniority reflected in the title.
It's quite a different vibe. It's quite a different vibe to us at Tesla, isn't it? Because
it's just you who we give like a low kind of
for those who've never worked for Guy, he always insists never look him in the eyes. And of
Your
course,
Royal Highness sometimes is also okay.
And of course, if you're referring to him, it's always Grandmaster Pajani. It must be interesting to work in that.
So it was kind of a fun conversation. Clearly, Tesla we talk about head of and such.
Yeah.
To avoid the sort of whatever CXO type of titles to be nimble. It's interesting to think about how that scales and whether that works better when you're a more research-centered organization versus product.
Yeah.
That is. So I think really fun conversation on it. Highly recommend that you listen to it.
100%.
And that you try out ElevenLabs, frankly. Like it's a fun product. But these are probably my 3 big takeaways.
Amazing. We're wrapping up here now, Guy. Yeah, really fun conversations. I definitely think you should listen back to those last couple for sure. Yeah, we've got some fun coming up next month as well. I teased the Macy session, which is coming out next week. Of course, if you don't want to miss an episode, make sure you subscribe. We're almost at 10,000 subscribers across our platforms. So yeah, help us grow that, which is great for a small, an early stage podcast.
Fairly new, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So help us grow that. And yeah, of course, finally, the AI Native Dev Con. Feel free to respond to the CFP and make sure you register for that. But till next time, Guy Po, It's been a pleasure.
It has been, yeah, and I hope you join us for the next one.
Tune in soon.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us next time on the AI Native Dev, brought to you by Tesla.